As a huge fan of Hailee Steinfeld, I had been meaning to watch Dickinson for a long time and I finally got around to watching it recently and I had a great time watching the show. The thing that immediately surprised me and hooked me was the anachronistic nature of the show with the characters casually using modern slang and words despite the show being set in the 19th century. And I think that ended up being the biggest strength of the show. Unlike most shows set in the past, this show was able to modernize the characters without completely changing what life in the 19th century would have been like. For those who are not aware, Emily Dickinson is a famous American poet who lived in the 19th century and is widely considered as one of the leading poets of the era. This show is a loose adaptation of her life and the challenges she underwent as a female unmarried poet in the 19th century. A show like this could have easily been boring and tedious to watch, but this modern retelling of the life of Emily Dickinson takes a unique approach to its material that helped widen its appeal. Hailee Steinfeld starred as the main character Emily Dickinson in this series and positively thrived in the role. She embodied the comedic and emotional aspects of the character brilliantly and added a charm to Emily Dickinson that made her entertaining to watch throughout the three seasons. The first season of the show introduces us to the main characters, which includes Emily, her sister Lavinia, her brother Austin, along with their parents Edward and Emily Dickinson, and Emily's lover Sue Gilbert. The real life Emily Dickinson never got married or had kids, but she wrote a lot of letters to Sue Gilbert, which many scholars have interpreted as romantic. This show takes advantage of that and puts the relationship between Sue and Emily at the forefront without necessarily putting a label on them. The first season is mostly about Emily trying to challenge the world she finds herself in and be
Working one on
recognized
one.
for her poetry, which proves
Do
to
you
be
know Sam
difficult
Bull
with a
sleeps
father
with all
who
the women he
believes women
publishes?
belong in the kitchen and shouldn't publish in
What are you
literature,
talking about? He's
and a
married.
mother who's obsessed
I
with
love
getting
her.
her married
She's so
and
old
sending
fashioned.
her away. To make matters worse, her brother ends up taking a liking to Sue and asks Sue to marry him, which Sue accepts, believing it to be a path to a better life considering she is a poor orphan. Emily handles all of these challenges as gracefully as possible and uses them to inspire her writing and creates some beautiful poems. I feel like the first season of the show was the absolute best of the show. The dynamic and chemistry between Emily and Sue in this season was absolutely unmatched as they slowly start to get closer despite the growing distance between them because of Sue's impending marriage. Watching Emily challenge the status quo was absolutely entertaining. My favorite moment from the season is the moment where Emily decides to dress up as a man to attend a college lecture her father explicitly forbid her from attending. The second season is where the show faltered a little bit. Emily gained a hunger for fame, which got worse when she met an editor who was interested in publishing her poems. She tried to understand why she was seeking fame, and when her poem was finally published, she was forced to accept that the people around her who read them weren't necessarily going to react or be affected by it as she imagined they would be, and slowly understood the dark side of seeking fame and eventually chose to reject it, though it does get a little bit complicated. While Emily's arc was fairly straightforward and had plenty of excellent moments, the season did complicate it a little bit more than it needed to be. Characters like Austin and Edward Dickinson act drastically different in the second season as Austin goes on a downward spiral after being unhappy with his marriage to Sue, and Edward suddenly seems to be fine with Emily getting her poems published as he gets into a business arrangement with the editor. While not entirely bad on its own, the season doesn't spend time exploring the reasons for the changes observed in the characters, and it makes it hard to take it a little bit seriously. Sue gets it the worst as she becomes a completely different character who is obsessed with being a rich socialite. She comes across as utterly unlikable as she manipulates and treats both Austin and Emily horribly, and it made it hard to care for her. Lavinia underwent the same arc as the first season as she tries to find love only to be disappointed by what she finds as she becomes obsessed with the wrong man once again. What made the first season so good was how it treated the characters well and made them worth rooting for, even if they stood against the protagonist at certain points. For example, Emily's father may not want her to publish her poems, but he's not above saving her daughter's favorite tree from being destroyed. That kind of nuance was stripped away from the characters in the second season. Throughout the show, one of the highlights is Emily's frequent interactions with the personification of death played by Wiz Khalifa. Their conversations always prove to be intriguing and thought provoking as Death offers advice to Emily about whatever dilemma they might be facing when they meet. On a completely irrelevant note, Hailee Steinfeld looked utterly stunning in the red dress she usually wore during the death scenes, and I absolutely loved it. The third season features the impact of the Civil War on the town of Amherst where Emily lives. Once again, there's a drastic change observed in the characters, but we do get the slightly understandable justification that there's a war going on that is affecting all of their lives, and that was obviously causing all of the changes. Sue undergoes a much needed improvement as she mends her relationships with Emily and Austin, and while it doesn't reach the heights of the first season, the Sue and Emily dynamic returns as a force to be reckoned with over the course of the season, and it is satisfying to witness. Emily starts off the season with a desperate desire to keep her family together, even though everything around her starts to fall apart. Her mother becomes disillusioned with life as a housewife. Lavinia finds herself in the same arc once again as she laments how she is alone and how all the men she loved ended up leaving her. Austin clears up his act to become a better father towards his newborn son, but decides to distance himself from the family and harbors a strong hatred against his father. The earlier episodes of the season builds a strong bond between Emily and her father Edward, as Emily sides with her father over her brother and becomes his right-hand confidant. It didn't make sense at first, but episode 8 makes it all worth it when her father decides to leave everything to his son in his will, despite everything Austin did. And this causes Emily to finally realize that no matter what she does and how much he might care, she will always be looked down by her father because she is a woman, and nothing was ever going to change that. That realization and confrontation wouldn't have been as impactful if the season hadn't spent the initial episodes building up her relationship with her father. Hailee Steinfeld gave an incredible performance during that moment, and it's honestly one of my favorite scenes from the entire series. The events of the season and the war raging in the background forces Emily to think about her purpose as a poet in this world, and it eventually gives her new inspiration to write poems that she believes will inspire people to be better and give them hope. The series ends on a beautiful note with Emily promising to herself to keep writing even if her poems do not have the desired effect on people, and she looks forward to her future and the many poems she is planning on writing. If you haven't watched Dickinson yet, I would definitely recommend giving it a try to see whether it might be to your liking. It's an Apple TV show, so that probably limited its audience when it was streaming, but hey, it did well enough to get 3 seasons. It's still on the same platform if you're considering watching it. I was initially turned off by the premise despite my love for Hailee Steinfeld, but the moment I gave it a chance, it surprised me and I quickly got invested, and I ended up watching all 3 seasons in a row. So check it out, see if you might like it, and thanks for listening.